Welcome to DejaVue.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. You just don't know it yet. Or maybe do. Maybe you have a deja vu. And we're back here with another amazing guest. But first of all, who are we? Maybe you don't see it right now. Maybe you don't see the video. Maybe you listen to us, to these familiar voices. Maybe you never heard before. Well, I am Alex Lichter, a web engineering consultant and Nuxt team member. Also doing a bit of content on YouTube and Twitch around the Vue.js ecosystem. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Thiessen. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. I am a Vue educator, so I do courses, content, all that stuff. You can find me teaching things online wherever you are. And we've got our guest here, Matt.
Hello, folks. My name is Matt Pocock. I am, I suppose, a TypeScript educator. I'm pretty noob in the kind of Vue world, but, you know, TypeScript gets everywhere, gets into every little crack and cranny. So I think, well, TypeScript's pretty hot on the Vue world too. So I'm kind of excited to talk to you guys.
Absolutely. Thanks, first of all, for joining the podcast. I mean, we had some cool guests on already, but you're definitely one of our most favorite ones already. You've been with Vercel before, with the X-State core team. I remember Stately AI. And now you are known to most of our listeners probably as the one and only TypeScript Wizard, of course. Sorry. And you're teaching TypeScript around the world to all the people there.
That's right. So yeah, I was part of the X-State core team, and there was some really complicated TypeScript problems involved in there. X-State is a pretty complex library. It sort of lets you build state machines and state charts in JavaScript, and building those in TypeScript especially is pretty challenging. That got me pretty interested in TypeScript, got me interested in kind of developer education, talking about X-State. I got hired for Vercel quite briefly as a developer educator. And then I went solo, talking about TypeScript full time. And this is what I do now, like 9 to 5. This is my job. And to explain the trucking thing as well, this is kind of our origin story on this podcast, which is I thought it would be a great idea to do a stream where I just drove a truck. You know, I've got like a steering wheel. I've got this trucking game, Euro Truck Simulator 2. And now it seems to have become like a part of my personality, at least where Alex is concerned. Because Alex was on the stream, said, do you want to come on this podcast? And I couldn't say no. So yeah, I'm the truck TypeScript guy apparently.
And I hope you'll do one of these streams at least, and hopefully more again, because it's a lot of fun. Having also maybe a little TypeScript logo on the truck, that would be amazing and on brand.
Yeah, it would be on brand, but I don't know if I want it to be my brand. You know what I mean? I don't want to be the truck guy. Like maybe I can make it work, but I feel like I'm too British, too posh to get that going. You know what I mean?
I see. Then let's leave that as a little anecdote and come to the whole part of, okay, you do 9 to 5 content creation, courses, videos, lots of free content on YouTube, on your Twitter, on your socials, are all linked in the show notes and description as well. So how did you decide to go solo? Maybe let's start with this first of all.
Yeah, like I was a teacher for a long time before I became a developer. I was a voice and accent coach, if you believe it, and singing teacher. So I was in London. I sort of went to drama schools, teaching people how to do Shakespeare and, you know, teaching singing, that kind of thing. And when I became a dev, I always wanted to link up the two because I always loved coding, always loved teaching as well. And so it just made sense to bring them together. And I'd been on my own, you know, running my own business for a long time, being nowhere near as successful as sort of being in like tech and doing that kind of thing. And so when the two things came together, it just felt really, really natural. And I've been loving it ever since. I just love it.
Sweet. I mean, like most of people, also listeners, otherwise you are also in the description and show notes. They know your courses. I mean, you have some free parts of it. For example, also the Zod course, and then of course all the TypeScript essentials and the whole like advanced TypeScript parts with like generics and all the little details of the language. So it has been a blast and a huge success as well. Like it's pretty amazing that first of all you said like, okay, let's combine the two things you like, and then do the step of going full-time into content creation, prepare the courses, and eventually make it work into a big success story around the world. So yeah, props to that.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing. Like I've partnered with some really good people, and I've partnered with a guy called Joel Hooks from Egghead, and
badass
massive,
courses, right?
yeah, badass courses. And he has been extremely cool to work with. So I credit him with a lot of our success for sure.
Perfect. We'll also definitely tag him somewhere, so he'll get a big shout out for that too. And I mean, like, in a way, we're all doing content creation. Like Michael's doing also full-time content creation in the Vue ecosystem. I don't do it full-time, but who knows, maybe one day. And I think in a way we all know like the challenges, but also the great parts. So maybe is there something that you're missing out compared to before, let's say?
Totally. I mean, the grass is always greener, right? But you know what? I've been really wanting recently just to go back to being part of an engineering team again. That's where I felt my happiest. I think like I just love being an engineer. I love fixing things, love like tackling problems. And I was thinking, like I build a lot for my job anyway. So I'm kind of always sort of like tinkering around with tools and like trying to get my processes better. But what I want is I just want to be put into like a 10-year-old legacy system, and I just want to like just slowly make it better, like battling all the politics. And, I just miss all the things you're supposed to hate about engineering. I miss like Jira, like how can you miss Jira? Like I do, actually, I do. I miss like being that, I don't know.
I was going to say, I completely agree with you until the Jira part, but
we will clip that.
Jira.
Maybe I miss linear, like I miss the idea of Jira, but more than the execution.
I agree with you though on the point of like those like really gnarly engineering problems. Like I get to play with the latest features and stuff, and that's fun. I don't have to deal with all this tech debt if I don't want to, but at the same time, I'm building rather small toy demos most of the time, and they're not like that interesting. Like you can only on your own do so many interesting things, and so that's something that I do miss. Yeah.
Who knew that Greenfield would get boring? You know what I mean? Like
it's too easy.
I want a brown field. The grass is always browner on the other side. Like that's what I want. I want the gnarly stuff, because that's actually where a lot of the juice is in terms of engineering, where you can develop a lot of skill. I actually went and I've been playing with this library called Neverthrow recently, and I went and did a couple of PRs for them, and this morning actually I just did like 6 PRs just upgrading all of their old like libraries and dependencies and things like that. I go, if I can't work on legacy code myself, I go out and find it, so totally. I mean, it's an emotional roller coaster doing content creation, I find, because it's so, you push something out there, you've no idea of the feedback that's going to come back. You don't know if it's going to bomb. You don't know if it's going to go crazy. And it's easy to tie your self-esteem up with that too, especially if you're supposed to be earning money from this pursuit. And I just want sometimes something more simple.
And would you say that engineering is more simple, quote unquote, or maybe more like, what you get, let's say?
Yeah, you're kind of like, I mean, having a salary is like totally different to having, relying on self-employed stuff for sure. Like there's definitely, I miss having a salary sometimes, just having that little bit of your brain turn off where you're constantly thinking about earning more or things like that.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know, I miss having colleagues. I miss like just working on a problem together. I don't know if simple is the right word, but maybe, no, I can't think of a better one. So I'll stick with that.
Different.
Yeah.
Different.
Yeah, Michael, I don't know if you feel the same, like if you're doing the same game as me.
Yeah, the ups and downs, especially like before I went full time, the ups and downs are definitely there. But once you have your entire livelihood based on it, then it's a totally different thing, because especially with projects that take, like these projects take on the order of months at least to get out there. And so you're slowly watching your bank account dwindle until you launch this new course or whatever. And so at least that's the typical business model. Some people do like a subscription or something like that, which, I'm sure the grass is greener on the other side. So I'm sure there's challenges with that too. But yeah, like, there's making, 80% or 90% of that year's income in like 2 weeks is both exhilarating, but also terrifying.
Totally bonkers. Yeah. Utterly mad way of doing things. But yeah, that is the game for sure.
And I think also on the other hand, like content creation, it's, I don't know, if you go every day, you do a bit of programming. Of course, some days you're better, and some days you might take longer for a bug, but in the end, you get a salary and you're good. And with content creation, it's not only the uncertainty of like how we'll perform, but also people expect a certain level of quality and also a bit of innovation. So how to make sure you can be still innovative while like still keep going. And it's also, I think, in a way, it's very unrealistic goals to have like, okay, always like the same quality, even better. There will be some things that won't be well received. There will be ups and downs as they are in your daily form as well. But of course, it's a bigger impact if like, hey, that's where my own money is on. Like, and if that will continue with the downtrend, what then? So yeah, it's totally tricky for sure.
I'm a huge fan of board games, and like it's kind of like, if you think of engineering as kind of like a board game where there's a little bit of randomness baked in, a little bit, you're drawing cards off a deck, but you basically know what's going to be in that deck. But content creation is you're drawing cards off a random deck, like, which is your performance at the start of the day. And then you have no idea what the card is going to do when you play it. You know what I mean? Like, there's randomness just baked in so many different parts of the algorithm. And a lot of my job is trying to reduce that randomness, really, is trying to make things more predictable, knowing that when I put a certain amount of work into something, then it's going to produce the thing. But you can't really, like, you're always going to be prey to your audience,
It's very funny that you bring that up, that randomness, because it's not something that I'd like fully connected. But when I was working as a dev, getting a salary, one of the things that really bothered me, I guess, was that if I worked twice as hard or did work that was like twice as amazing, I didn't get paid twice as much. And so that I don't know what it was about it. It just kind of like irked me. And so I was like, okay, what if I do my own business, then like if it does twice as well, then I get paid twice as much.
And you do twice as well, yeah.
But then the thing is, then there's way more randomness involved. And so it's like, you could do put in twice as much work, do twice as good of a job. But, if there's that randomness, you may or may not see those results. So.
Do you want the fluctuation or do you want the mean?
Yeah.
Some days I want the mean. That's all I want.
100%. I also feel like in one, especially in vacation, like where I've been a couple of weeks ago now, it's just like you have this tiny part of your brain. It's like, hey, you know what? How are things? Maybe we should put up some content. Why not doing some planning? Hey, could you reach out to someone to join the podcast? This and that. So there are always tiny things like you can't, at least for me, it's really difficult, like fully shut it off. On the other hand, it's also like, is it in general possible, like fully just shut off, do nothing? It's also tricky.
Yeah. I've told this story on a different podcast before, but I went from being self-employed as a singing teacher for 6 years to then starting my first ever dev job. And that was my first ever full-time job. And at that moment, I realized, oh, that little ticking clock in my head, that's gone. I can just relax. I can go on holiday. They'll pay me to go on holiday? What the hell? Like, it's crazy. That can't be right. But yeah, it's there for sure. I mean, and I think it does help. If you're constantly pushing yourself to be better, then even if you're in a full-time job, you're going to keep like trying to earn above the mean, essentially, and trying to push yourself above what's expected of you, and then you tend to rise quicker. Yeah.
Also motivation in general. Like, why are you doing the things? Like, it's of course also you want to pay the bills at some point, but you're interested in some topic. You're also like, maybe people like your content because you can explain things very well, because you're very entertaining, maybe both, maybe none of them, maybe just because it's hilarious. Who knows? But they're there. And in the end, if you give the people something, I think it's also very rewarding, intrinsic motivation. Be like, okay, I can help people with that, and also paying the bills. Cool. So talking about helping people, there's also one thing that helped a lot of developers when it eventually came out, and that was TypeScript, obviously. That helped how people fixing bug, writing better code. Some would argue and say like, is it really better? We'll see that in a bit. And I think most of the people listening or watching, they know what TypeScript is, but maybe it would be good to iterate on why should people use TypeScript?
Yeah. So I've gone through many different versions of this over the years. I think the best way of talking about why you should use TypeScript is, do you want your IDE to be more helpful or less helpful, right? The IDE, your integrated development environment, the place where you write your code. Are you happy writing an environment like Notepad, you know what I mean, where you have no help whatsoever, no syntax highlighting, no whatever? No, you're not, right? You want something that's a bit better. You want syntax highlighting. You want, let's say, autocomplete on things. You want to be able to navigate different files and stuff. You know, and the more powerful you want your IDE to be, I think the better. You know, and there comes a time with JavaScript and a limit with JavaScript, really, which is you realize, right, there are certain things I want my IDE to be able to do that it can't do. When I'm working with a library, I want to be able to like see all the parts of that library and like autocomplete my way to various functions. When I call something from that library, I want to know if I'm getting it wrong, you know? And you just can't do that with JavaScript because it has no idea what type anything is supposed to be, you know? And so without types in a language, there's no way for powerful features like autocomplete, rename symbol, go to definition, things that are like table stakes in other languages like C# or various strongly typed languages. You need a layer on top of JavaScript in order to make your IDE more powerful, and that's what TypeScript is. So it's not types for type's sake. You know, it's not like a strongly typed language in the traditional sense of the word. Those types disappear at runtime. They're totally gone. But what it is just a layer on top to make your IDE way more powerful. So you get errors inside your IDE. You've got all these features like autocomplete, go to definition. You can explore what type of function is supposed to take. It just makes everything so much better. And I think makes you code so much faster because it makes the feedback loop so much shorter. Because instead of having to flit between the docs and your IDE or the browser and your IDE, you're just in your IDE for longer periods, just getting that feedback.
I've noticed that with JavaScript, sometimes you have to jump through to a method and then go back up a level, hunt down where the data originates from to figure out, okay, was it items or item?
Oh.
And like, what was, or like some like, subtle variation, and you're like, okay, it's not working. What's going on? And you have to like, or you console log the object out to see what's going on here.
Yeah.
And that's just it's a time waster, you know?
Yeah. It forces you to do so much work, like JavaScript, I mean, forces you to do so much more work just in producing your code.
Yeah.
You know? And especially when something goes wrong, you know, when something goes right, you know, when you know that library inside out, when you can just get a feel for the code you're writing. Maybe you've written a similar feature before, then JavaScript and TypeScript are pretty similar, right, in terms of the amount of time it takes. But TypeScript is just there helping you when things go wrong, you know, and just giving you little hints. And of course, when you come to change your code, that's when TypeScript is insanely powerful because, you know, if you need to refactor ID to item ID, let's say, and that's in 100 different places in the code base, a find and replace is not always going to cut it. You know, because ID might be used in various different situations. And so you can just do a rename symbol, you know, F2 or whatever, and just bam, and it instantly changes everywhere. So an hour-long job in JavaScript just literally takes 2 seconds in TypeScript.
I still like the highlight that you meant before, like, oh yeah, if you have like C# or Rust or whatsoever, they're all like, oh yeah, you can do that with our language. And in JavaScript, like, oh yeah, we need this little layer on top because, well, JavaScript is not strongly typed. I mean, we have like data types, like we have number, for example, or string in JavaScript, but yeah, with TypeScript, we can not only actually express them, but also more complex types. So I also like the take of like, okay, think about your IDE first, not even thinking about the CI or like runtime versus build time. Just like, okay, very simple step. You want to have like the most helpful IDE possible, right? You want to ship features as fast as possible. So you want to write them faster without scavenging the docs through a library. Just okay, hey, what's the method? There it is. Very simple. And I've given some JavaScript workshops, also showing people some TypeScript, and then people are like, yeah, okay, but then the library authors, they can use TypeScript. It's fine. Why do I have to use it for my end application?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about that is that, if we make a sort of distinction between library and application, you imagine that you have your application and then sort of above it in a tree, you've got all of this kind of this library that depends on this library, depends on this library, And so the connections between those libraries sort of, they need to be kind of guaranteed, so they need to be type safe, as we say. And then right at the bottom, sure, you're consuming a bunch of libraries like that, but this could technically just be TypeScript or JavaScript, doesn't matter. What I like to think of is weirdly, if you're writing JavaScript now, the thing that's in the background helping you kind of do autocomplete in JavaScript and make sure that your IDE is as powerful as it can be with JavaScript, it's actually TypeScript in the background, weirdly enough. So there's the TypeScript server bundles in with VS Code, Visual Studio Code, which basically just runs in the background and looking at your JavaScript code, because every JavaScript program is technically a TypeScript program. It just doesn't have any types in it, And so, you totally can if you want to, but I tend to find I code faster, and most people code faster when your IDE is more powerful. So if you're happy with JavaScript, if you feel, I just want to stick with dynamic typing, don't want to bother with all these extra type annotations, then stick to JavaScript if you want to. But if you're a library author, you basically have to use TypeScript, because it means if you don't use TypeScript, then people have to sort of patch declarations on top of your library. It just makes everything so much easier for the consumers of your library, whether they're in TypeScript or JavaScript.
It's interesting that JavaScript applications or JavaScript code is valid TypeScript. I think Evan, you was talking about future version of Vue and making it so that just by default, everything is TypeScript, as opposed to right now where it's opt-in. But if you're writing JavaScript in your Vue component, then you wouldn't even notice, because it still just works the same way.
Totally. You can just disable all the TypeScript rules, TypeScript no check or whatever, and then you're just writing JavaScript in a I assume maybe a .vue file or whatever.
I mean, the same works with a normal TS file. Even there, you can say, okay, I have my TypeScript file. It can be just JavaScript, and it's fine. Especially for migrations, I think that's really sweet if you have a .js file. You name it .ts, and you can slowly build up the types and add things, which... I see. Matt, you have some opinions on that. Now I'm curious.
I do. I have some very strong opinions.
Bring them on. That's what we're here for.
If we could dive deep into how to migrate a JavaScript file, a JavaScript code base to a TypeScript code base, because there's definitely a right way and a wrong way to do that. Do you want to dive?
Let's go for it. Yeah. Let's hear why my way is the wrong way.
Well, so your way is the way where you basically just turn all the JavaScript files into TypeScript files, and if we think there's kind of two sliders, you can sort of move up and down. One slider is the strictness slider, which is you basically, and the other slider is the JavaScript to TypeScript file slider. So the more the JavaScript to TypeScript file slider is high, the more TypeScript files you have, the higher slider is, the stricter your TypeScript is. You can configure TypeScript by going into tsconfig.json and kind of fiddling with the settings there. Now, what I tend to recommend is setting TypeScript at your proper level of strictness, your desired level of strictness, and then just slowly, PR by PR, just changing JavaScript files into TypeScript files, right? Because then what you're doing is, the way you would cleverly do this is you would do a dependency graph of every single file in your repo. And you basically go, okay, what's the file that has no dependencies and that lots of other files depend on? And you do that one first, because then ideally, no TypeScript file should ever depend on a JavaScript file. So no typed file should ever depend on an untyped file, because then that's just nasty. Right? You would just end up doing any in all sorts of places. It's no fun. The way that you described is going the other way, which is to convert everything over to TypeScript and then slowly raise the strictness level. Now, if you think about that, the strictness level is global, affects the entire project. So you need to and there's no real clever way of like just going, I mean, you sort of can do it, but it's really hacky, of just saying, okay, only these files should be strict and these files shouldn't be strict. You can do it with like project references, with tsconfig.json in a certain place, but it's not very fun. So I tend to recommend basically whap up to the level of strictness and then just go file by file by file by file. This is how Sentry did it. Sentry converted an enormous code base. There was a great article about this, which I can send you afterwards.
We will link that, yes, for sure.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Basically, they just did it over a period of, I think, like a year, 18 months or something, slowly doing it PR by PR while still shipping features, which is the way to do it.
You can't do big bang.
And I think they still have...
It doesn't work.
Yeah, cannot do it a big bang. And with a strictness setting, that's a big bang every time you change the
Then you have to touch all the files again. And to be fair, I mean, I think we're on the same page there. So like, I think if you once set your TS config up, like, okay, hey, should we check the indexes? Should we allow any, what are our rules? And then migrate files step by step over, no matter if they're component files, if they're JavaScript files, whatever it is. And with, as you mentioned, a dependency graph analysis. So you really make sure, it's not just a random file. And then you have weird scenarios like, okay, I have to type in any here, and then maybe I revisit and I will never do it. I think that's a very good strategy. That will make things easier. I also remember Stripe was also moving to TypeScript as well with an enormous amount of files. So and they pursued a similar strategy, which I also think that's the way to go.
Yeah, it's totally the way to go. So yeah, I'm not saying you were advocating for the wrong way, but yeah, I just something that would just trigger in my head, and I just started shifting my seat.
It's really good because lots of people, I still see hey, TypeScript now, that's more than 80% of the people hey, TypeScript is good, and every framework has a wonderful integration with it. And there is no, let's say, real competition. I mean, this Flow still exists, but not that many people using Flow compared to TypeScript. Then people are hey, okay, maybe we should try it out. Maybe we should move over. So I think it's definitely something valuable to think about for people who might be in a migration right now. Of okay, how do we do it the best way without, halting production or without wasting too much time touching the wrong files first.
Yeah, and if you're in a production code base, you're basically always in a migration. You know what I mean?
True.
Everything is slowly migrating, all the time. So
it's always legacy as well.
I miss it so much. I miss it. That's what I miss.
I can bring you on to some very nasty ones if you want to. Just have a little look into.
It's turned into a live coding session. Absolutely. I'm so down for that.
That would be really fun. That could be another live stream for sure. Also maybe getting in touch with a little bit of Vue and your opinion on that. There are really cool things with Vue in a composition API with generic components, because you can write JSX in Vue, but Vue components are lots of fun as well.
Yeah, I saw there was some custom syntax for that, I think. I did keep up with a little bit of Vue, but no, I've never written in production, so I can't claim to be an expert.
Maybe one day it could be a fun little thing. So definitely let us know when you're up for that. Yeah. When there's time.
Sounds good. There's time.
So there is one more thing that personally I heard a lot with people having this legacy code base, and let's say they don't even use a framework, right? They use, I would say, vanilla JavaScript, but it's not really use jQuery, right? And jQuery and TypeScript, a bit tricky. But let's say they even have a vanilla JavaScript with imperative DOM API. And I know lots of people then don't do the modern way of hey, we have a build step and a CI, but just the old school way of here is my FTP client, here's the JavaScript file, I move it over. Yeah. And usually it was oh yeah, you have the build step there, and people oh yeah, okay, cool. But what if in 1 year the build step doesn't work anymore because you need a new node version, update this and that and that? So how would you say you could tell the people that are afraid of the build or compile step that TypeScript more or less introduces? What could you tell them to maybe ease their fears?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of FTP, sort of bung something up on a server, that's not the main use case when I think of no compile step. The one that really comes to mind is actually with full stack developers and Node. So for instance, with Node, you can write .js files, and then, you can basically, it just simplifies so much. You can just run those source files with Node. You can debug them really easily with the VS Code debugger. Don't need to set up anything complicated, just works. I sometimes do reach for that myself. Sometimes I don't really want the build step because Node, I mean, actually, they did ship something that sort of runs TypeScript files recently, but until recently, Node could not run TypeScript files. So you'd have to turn them into JavaScript files first, do this horrible build step as you're talking about, in order to kind of get it working. So what was your question? Something about like allaying fears?
The question is more or less, what if people say they don't want that build step? Let's say they want to build less. But also, I mean, in a way, if you introduce TypeScript, it's a dependency, of course. If you use a framework, it's also a dependency, obviously. But then people are like, okay, the same code should still run in 5 years, let's say. And I don't want to rebuild it and say like, okay, the Node version doesn't run there anymore, so this and that.
Yeah, and I've been there as well. Like, it's not fun. And every dependency you bring onto your application essentially exposes you to the passage of time. Time will just make fools of us all, and it makes fools of every dependency that you have. I moved a friend's website over from Gatsby to Next, I think recently, and relatively recently, and just literally because there was so many dependencies in Gatsby, I couldn't be bothered to figure out like how they all fit together, whereas Next was just one dependency. And so I think that's the real question we're going to be thinking about here is like, how many dependencies are you introducing when you move to a build step? Because if you're wanting, let's say, ESLint, that's like a plugin architecture. That's a lot of different plugins that will get brought in. Whereas if you move to something like Vite, for instance, that's kind of just one dependency, and it's kind of all bundled together. So if you update your Vite version, probably it's going to work with everything. So I'm not sure what I would say, because like if you're really set on buildless, if you feel like the entire revolution in CI/CD, in testing, in making sure your code is doing what you think it's doing, has not produced any worth for you, then I don't think I'm going to sell you on like TypeScript being a cool IDE like extension and like making that better. I think there's just a fundamental idea at the root of all of these improvements, which is that we need safety nets, as developers. We need safety nets. Like I don't want to be walking up a cliffside, like possibly like slip and fall and just sort of break production. You know what I mean? I want there to be something that's going to give me a warning before that happens. I want to feel sure-footed in where I'm going, because then I don't need to sort of like stumble along the cliff. I can just run. You know what I mean? Because I know that if I fall, something will catch me. So that's my thinking there, is that I just love TypeScript, especially when it runs in CI/CD, because I can get a warning before my users get the warning, or before it breaks for my users. So for me, it's all about users, like being in service to giving them a good time. And often if it's like a really important application, like a financial application and stuff, I bloody need those guardrails. I need those safety nets, because if I don't have them, like my job might be in jeopardy. You know what I mean? If I break something serious. So that's how I feel. Is I'm not sure that if you're really into that buildless stuff, I can convince you, but that's my feeling. I wish I'd ended that on like a more hammer line. You know what I mean? Like, but I just
no, that was perfect. That was great.
Hopefully, you can like make a social clip of it before I just sort of stumbled into oblivion.
No worries. We'll clip it. That will be lovely.
Okay, good.
So I have a question for you of something that has confused me for a while, and I'm sure confuses other people with TypeScript, and that is this whole types and interfaces thing. So they feel like they're basically the same thing. And I think at one point I read an article that favored interfaces, and I can't remember the argument, but now I just remember maybe I should use an interface instead of a type. And so that's basically my my thought process. And so I was wondering if you could explain those differences, and when do I use one over the other?
Yeah. So we're kind of talking about like types versus interfaces when you're declaring like a single object type. You know what I mean? Like the props that your component should take. In Vue, you call them props, right? Yeah. So the props your component should take, is it still define props? Is that still the API?
Yeah, exactly. You're spot on, man.
So how do you declare that? You've got actually three options. You've got either you can either like pass it directly to define props, so using an object literal, or you can extract it out into a type. So say type my props or whatever, and then declare that. And then you've got interface my props, and you stick it in an object. So let's just set out the game as it were. You've got types can basically express more things. So you can express union types with types, whereas interfaces can't do that. Types can express like strings and numbers, whereas interfaces sort of can't. But interfaces can do a couple of things that types can't do. So I don't think of there as being like a difference really when you're just expressing a normal object type. They kind of like perform the same, they do the same job. The difference is when you want to combine two object types together. So when you have, let's say a base user type, and you want to do a little bit of inheritance. So you have your base user that has like an ID and name, and then you have like a user with email, for instance, that just sort of adds an email onto it. What you could do is you could basically use an intersection type, an AND operator, an ampersand to basically just go and smush them together. Or you could use interface extends. And interface extends, basically you declare two interfaces, let's say, and one interface extends from another. So they've got a hierarchical relationship. So interface extends is much better than the AND operator. Much, much better, because you get a lot more guarantees there. If I have an ID of string on the base interface, and then have an ID of number on the one that extends from it, you actually get a warning there when you use interfaces. But with a type, you actually don't get a warning. So it lets you smush together two incompatible objects. So you get ID of string and ID of number. Like that, you actually end up with ID of never. But it only sort of tells you that further down the line when you go to use the object. So interface extends is much better than type, but type can express more things. So if you want to do any kind of like hierarchical stuff, I would recommend using interfaces. If you want to just be more expressive, I suppose, or like do really anything else, like express union types, then you can use types. There are like several other differences as well. They treat hovers slightly differently. There's an implicit, index signature on types, but not interfaces. And you can use declaration merging on interfaces, but not types. So we can get into that if you want to, but that's like the high level overview.
I mean, that makes sense to me. That's a pretty good answer.
I think the declaration merging is especially something if you work on the front end once again, and you have like an interface called form data. I love that example so much. Like, and accidentally you have all these things because it merges with the declaration from the lib ES5 or whatever. Yes, hopefully not on ES5, like ES 2023, 2024, whatever. So like with declaration that TypeScript basically provides for the actual form data type for form data in the browser.
We should explain the mechanics of that as well. So what declaration, that's a really good example. What declaration merging means is that two types with the same name, if you try to do that, you'll get an error saying duplicate identifier. So you cannot create two types with the same name in the same scope. In different modules, it's fine, but in the same scope, no. With interfaces, they merge together. So you create two objects with the same name and they merge together. So weird. You will get errors if you do incompatible stuff, but that's so weird. The reason I don't really mention that as like a top level problem is, but the form data example is really good, is because you can actually lint that away. So with ESLint, you can basically say, no, you shouldn't be doing that. TypeScript has that for a few reasons, but what you're saying with the form data, which I never actually thought of, never happened to me before, is basically your local interface of form data merges with the global one, which is so grim because you end up with all of the stuff that's on form data plus the stuff that you intend. Ooh, really
Feel
horrible.
free to steal that for the next video tweet.
Oh, thanks. All right, I'll write it down. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but like it's so painful. And then when you understand, okay, hey, that's declaration merging, and if you use type, that will never happen to you. Then like, oh, that's good to know. You never forget it.
Yes, exactly. And so I go back and forth on like what the default should be, because like sometimes declaration merging happens to me. Like I'm in a 4,000 line file. I accidentally name two things the same. And I just think, I never want that to happen again. I'm using types by default. But then I realize, God, interface extends is actually so much better than using the ampersand operator, intersections. So I'm going to just use interfaces by default. And so I genuinely just go back and forth on what I recommend. And this is why this topic is something I get asked on like every podcast. It's like, it is genuinely tight, it's close. And so it is worth discussing and knowing all of the ramifications of choosing one or the other.
And you wouldn't say like use either types or interfaces. Like it's fine to mix them whatever you want to do. Is that if the more like hierarchical stuff or like more like, okay, perfect. That's great.
Yeah, people go really hard on like, no, you have to be consistent. You know what I mean? You don't have to be consistent. They do different things. Like it doesn't matter if you have a type. Like interfaces can extend from types. Types can do a lot of stuff that interfaces can do. People go nuts about consistency, but it doesn't matter too much.
Though I think in a way, if you have rules, as you said, like hierarchical things using interface, that's also a way of consistency. It's more like some rule of thumb, so people are not like, oh, in half an hour time to decide is it a type or an interface. Well, like just use whatever, and if it doesn't work, then like if it doesn't suit your needs, then just change it. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a lint rule in like TypeScript ES lints, for instance, that just says this. You could express this with an interface instead when you have like intersection. I can't remember quite what it is, and it might not even exist. I might have just invented it in my brain, but it's useful if it exists.
That's true. Yeah, we'll check that after the show, and if it's the case, you know where to find it.
But hopefully that sort of puts it to bed for everyone. Maybe it doesn't.
I mean, there will always people be like, yeah, but what if this scenario? What is here? In the end, I think it's good to know the differences and the benefits. Like I also remember all the hovers about like of the like, oh yeah, the intersection types, and like, what is it now? Can you please tell me instead of like just showing the type and the other type? But yeah, fair.
Yeah, they do hover differently. We could talk about that if you fancy, but that is particularly nerdy.
Then let's maybe continue with some more TypeScript features that are pretty amazing, because maybe some people, some listeners, some viewers know one of your libraries that you wrote, Matt. So we're not only talking about XState, where you own a core team, but we are actually talking about TS Reset. Maybe you could briefly describe what TS Reset is, and then maybe some things we hopefully won't need anymore in the newest TypeScript version.
Yeah, so TS Reset, what it does is TypeScript ships global types along with your project, basically. So it ships various what are called declaration files that explain what JavaScript is sort of doing. So it has like, if you're targeting in your TypeScript, let's say ES 2023, then you have access to string.replaceAll. Whereas if you're targeting earlier than that, you don't have those methods. And so TypeScript has a way of basically making those methods available to you. And if your code is supposed to be run in the DOM as well, which most Vue apps are, then it has, it lets you access window and document.createElements and all that sort of stuff. So I think that those global typings can be improved a little bit or tweaked in certain ways. And there are various global functions that sort of behave oddly in certain situations. The classic example is when you're filtering out an array of stuff. So let's say you have an array of numbers, but some of those numbers might be null, right? So you've got an array of number or null, and you do a filter function. So you do array.filter, and then you pass it Boolean, not like true or false, but like Boolean with a capital letter. What this does is it will filter anything out that isn't truthy. So you're going to end up with basically all the nulls gone because null isn't truthy. You're also going to end up with 0, like being filtered out as well. But then, which is, pro and con, maybe you don't want 0 for whatever reason. But then the type that's produced by that, so obviously at runtime that will happen. All the numbers and nulls will disappear, all the nulls will disappear. But on the type level, TypeScript doesn't know that that's what's happening for some reason. They just haven't sort of like patched that together. That's not in the global typings. And so you'll end up with a type of number or null in there, even though null can never exist in that array. And so TS Reset, it does a couple of things like that. It tweaks a couple of the global types. It makes filter work with filter Boolean. And it makes dot includes work a bit better in various situations, makes local storage a little bit stricter. It makes a few things just a little bit better. And this has been like wildly popular. It's been my most popular library by far. I've got a few little utilities here and there, but this is the one that's just gone nuts, really. I think it's up to like 300,000 weekly downloads on NPM or something like this. It's crazy. And yeah, this is basically what TS Reset does. Now, you're alluding to something that came out in TypeScript 5.4, was it?
5.4, 5.5, yeah, I can't fully remember. You know better.
5. Is it 5. I think it's 5.4. Oh, no, 5.5. It is 5.5. Which is that there's this whole wonderful feature that got added by an amazing author called Dan Vanderkam, who wrote a brilliant book on TypeScript. That's in its second edition now, called Effective TypeScript. Very much worth a read. And what he added to TypeScript, he basically made a PR to TypeScript. He went on a retreat, like a coding retreat, and he just made a PR to TypeScript. And PRs to TypeScript from outside the core team, like major ones like this, very rarely like get accepted. But this one was just like, and it's fantastic. What it does is basically before this, if you had like let's say you were checking if a value was a string, right? It's coming in from an external API. You don't know where it's coming from. You need to check it's a string. You could create a reusable isString function that just checks inputs equals, or type of input equals string. Now, if you use that function, if you didn't wrap it in a function, if you just inlined the check, just that type of check, TypeScript would infer it nicely. But if you wrap it in a function, then use the function, it wouldn't infer it. So the thing would still be string or null or something, But with Dan's change, inferred type predicates in TypeScript 5.5, it does check it, and it checks it automatically. And this means that things like filter Boolean, filter Boolean technically still doesn't work, weirdly. It still doesn't work. But you can do like filter passing in type of array member equals number. And so you're checking in that dot filter whether the thing that's being passed in is a number, and then it will infer it properly for you. So yeah, I mean, incredibly cool job by Dan. It's one of the coolest TypeScript features I've seen in the last couple of years, really. I think it's just amazing. And so TS reset still has a place, but TypeScript, it's so cool to see TypeScript itself kind of like catching up to it in terms of what you can do. And if anything, I think if inferred type predicates had existed when I was thinking about TS reset, I probably wouldn't have made it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's that good, And I think actually doing that type of check is probably even better than filter Boolean, because you don't get the zeros filtered out, for instance. It is an amazing change. So cool.
And would you say if more, let's say, changes in TypeScript, ideally the TS reset would be obsolete at some point if all the things that...
Yeah?
Totally.
I mean, I think a lot of the things that are in TS reset are not like that in TypeScript for a reason, So something, or they're arguable, and TypeScript just sort of landed on the other side of the debate, So I think some of the things in TS reset will never change in TypeScript. TypeScript, it's sort of quite hard to change the global typings in TypeScript, because then you just sort of break a load of stuff, But yes, I'm not sure TS reset will ever be obsolete, but I think the need for it will definitely diminish over time as TypeScript improves, because it is improving all the time. Their cadence of releases is nuts. They are releasing stuff all the time. And yeah, this one especially was a doozy.
100%. When I saw that PR landing, I remember all the conversations around it, because it's very unintuitive for someone that's learning TypeScript and be like, okay, I use a filter here. I know there won't be any... there will only be numbers in there, right? With just type of number. Yeah. Why doesn't TypeScript know? Or same with so object keys, object values. I think there are lots of things where when you program JavaScript in all the freedom of a not strongly typed language, and be like, okay, I take objects, I mangle them around somehow, and then you go to TypeScript and be like, wait, now I have to cast things because TypeScript doesn't know anymore. In a way, TypeScript is forcing you into a certain, at least a tiny degree, in a certain programming style, to be more strict with what you do yourself. Would you see that as
totally
as a pro, as a con, as both?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true, isn't it? What your premise is absolutely correct. Is that while TypeScript basically supports a subset of what JavaScript can do. If you're writing in JavaScript, you can do a lot more different patterns, a lot more crazy stuff, implicit stuff that sort of don't need types than you can when you're using TypeScript, And I would argue it is a good thing to be restricted, if you think of a language like Go, what everyone says about Go is that it's extremely restricted in what you can do. Like there are very few patterns you can actually get away with. You have to check all your errors all the time. You have to do, and so every Go app is like a boring app. Like there's no fancy stuff happening in Go. It's all just real dull. I mean, that's what people say. I've never written in Go, so I'm not sure if it's true, but that's kind of what writing like a TypeScript app is like. Now, you can get away with more stuff in TypeScript. TypeScript has an extremely dynamic type system. Its type system is actually Turing complete. You can do all sorts of crazy
like tic-tac-toe and something in TypeScript. I've seen so many different things. Yeah.
So, the canonical crazy example is someone made a runtime for the TypeScript type system, and they made Flappy Bird in types.
Wow.
Yeah, bonkers. So they made like a Zig interpreter that took the TypeScript type system and made Flappy Bird. Okay, cool. Okay, right. Blimey. Someone re-implemented SQL in types. It's bonkers. So you can do all that stuff, but actually the things that it lets you do at runtime are relatively contained. Actually, it does contain you in a certain way. And I find that really nice. I like being pushed towards a happier path. And I think the thing you should think about this is, why does any exist in TypeScript? Because any is like a way of opting out of the type system, of saying here but no further. It's a way of saying, just shut up, TypeScript. I know what I'm doing. And so with any in TypeScript, you can really just do a bunch of crazy stuff if you want to. You can go back to doing all the bonkers JavaScript things that you like doing. And any is there in TypeScript because JavaScript is so nuts, and what it means is it's a way of TypeScript saying, slowly over time we will improve, we will make more patterns possible by our clever inference, but some things will never be possible to explain and do in TypeScript. So for that you have any type.
That totally makes sense. And maybe on that note, any, I think everybody, even people not know, like writing TypeScript, they know any. But there's also something that people should use instead of any very often, which is unknown. But I think not that many people know about unknown than knowing about any.
Yeah, I think you think of any as really representing any type in TypeScript. This could be anything. And I think that's the wrong way of saying it, because if we think of the type system as kind of like rock, paper, scissors, like this thing fits into this thing fits into this thing, it's sort of like, you've got like kind of, I watched that video the other day of that, of the woman saying like, oh no, fit the thing into the square hole, into the square hole. Everyone's seen that video. And so it's one of those things, where the triangle fits into the triangle, the square fits into there. But any is it doesn't fit into that system. Any is kind of like a tactical nuclear missile, just sort of landing on that whole setup, just exploding everything. It breaks the rules. You know what I mean? It just, okay. Any does not make sense. So when you use any, that's what you're doing to your code. You're basically just like creating a black hole. It doesn't fit in the type system. Any, in technical terms, it's assignable to everything, and everything is assignable to it. And so whenever you're using any, you are breaking out of the type system. Whereas unknown, it's basically like a triangle. You know what I mean? It's in the system. It's playing by the rules. And what unknown is basically is everything is assignable to unknown, but unknown is only assignable to itself. What that means is if you have a function which is called that takes in a property of unknown, you can pass anything to it. But then you can't access any properties on that unknown. You have no idea what it is. And so you will get warnings when you try to access properties that you haven't checked for. And so with unknown, you can kind of narrow it down to different things. Whereas any, you can pass anything to it and you can access any properties on it. So it just explodes everything. And so I do have an article that says like unknown won't save you from any or something like that. So it's not always appropriate to use unknown where you're using any, because sometimes you do need to just sort of bash TypeScript on the head and just say, shut up, I know what I'm doing in this situation. But unknown definitely has a place, and it's basically like, you can think of it as the top type in TypeScript. It's the thing that sort of, if you really don't know what it is, use an unknown. Really good for things like when you have like public facing API functions, you don't know what they're going to be called with. Great for form data. Great for anything that needs validating. Use an unknown.
Wonderful. I think that's a perfect point in terms of any unknown, and how people should maybe treat their inputs not as like any, oh, whatever, what could go wrong, just like with a little bit more care if it's needed, right? That's the important part.
Totally, yeah. I mean, as front-end developers, we are always dealing with unknown inputs, you know what I mean? And so using unknown is pretty useful.
Wonderful. Then I think it's slowly but surely time to wrap up already for this episode. Matt, thank you so much for joining the DejaVue podcast. Thanks for coming here and talk about content creation, TypeScript, and a little bit of Go as well.
Nice. I'm glad no more trucks were mentioned. That's the thing I'm thankful for.
Not that has to be another episode for that, then, or not live stream. We'll come up with something, that's for sure. Or you will go on one more. We'll see. Then the most important last question at the very end is, Matt. First, okay, actually 2 parts. First, is there anything you want to plug? I'm more than sure there is. And second, where can people follow you for more insights around TypeScript, courses, and so on and so on?
Sure. You should go to totaltypescript.com. It's the place I've been pushing so much free content up there. It's insane. Since August last year, I'm writing a TypeScript book that is available up there for free. So you just read my book, 16 chapters, a lot of words, and a bunch of free tutorials up there as well. And there's a paid course as well. There's one section that's kind of for beginners to intermediate and a section for super advanced folks as well. So there's going to be something up there that you want. And I'm also pushing a newsletter recently too. So I'm doing TypeScript Tuesdays. So one should be going out very, very soon today. And so, yeah, that's just going to be full of kind of like cool insights, my tips that I've been like posting on Twitter since like February 2022. So yeah, totaltypescript.com, that's the place, especially the newsletter side too.
Wonderful. Links are all in the show notes, of course.
Great.
Very important. And yeah, I can only second that. I bought the course when it came out. Super nice. Happy that I did. Because even using TypeScript for a couple of years, like there's always something to learn, or just like a slightly different explanation to things where like, this is even better to understand it. So yeah, I can just say thank you so much for all the free content, for all the courses you deliver, and thank you so much for coming on to DejaVue.
Mm-hmm. No worries. Nice to meet you both.
And then, of course, for everybody still on here, yeah, you should be. It's not the end yet, but almost. Feel free to check out the later episodes, like the earlier ones. Whenever you're watching this, maybe just watch it when it comes out. Also, if you have any question to the TypeScript Wizard, and not the truck guy, but the TypeScript Wizard, very important to mention it once again, bring them on Twitter and in the YouTube, the comments, wherever you want to, and there will probably be a chance to ask him. Maybe he'll be there answering them. So yeah, bring them on, and thank you for joining, and see you in the next episode, folks.